and Portugal. Extreme heat is likely through Monday and Tuesday. The Met Office have issued warnings. For more details on those warnings and advice about what to do, visit the Met Office website. Bye for now.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood. Well, it's been a chaotic week in the world of politics and we've a fast-fueled show for you today for your political digest. We're expecting to hear from the family of ARCHE BATTERSBEE as well this hour. We'll bring you that live as soon as it happens. Well, here's what's coming up elsewhere on the show. The race for number 10 is heating up. Liz Truss and Penny Mordaunt are in a bitter battle to get ahead in this race. We will be getting the very latest developments throughout the show today as the candidates are set to face each other in a hustings in an hour's time and a debate later tonight. Is Sir Keir Starmer now aboard the Brexit-backing bus? A lot of B's in that sentence. He's appeared to be as he's on his visit to Germany today. He said the UK's future could be better off outside the European Union. We'll explore that. And a watchdog report has warned that MI5 needs more funding to combat right-wing terror groups, as concern is growing that they may target British military personnel to join their groups. We'll be discussing this in detail. And of course, give me your political briefing on all the stories today. Send in your views and opinions by emailing us gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me @gbnews.
Good afternoon, it's 2 minutes past 12. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. A High Court judge has ruled that doctors can lawfully stop providing life support treatment to 12-year-old Archie Battersbee. It follows a review of evidence at a hearing in London today. Archie suffered a catastrophic brain injury 3 months ago. Last month, a High Court judge ruled that he was brainstem dead. His parents had successfully challenged the judgment in the Court of Appeal and were fighting for treatment to continue. They'll be issuing a statement shortly. The mother of the British aid worker Paul Yuri, who was being held in a Russian-occupied region of eastern Ukraine, has confirmed he has died. The 45-year-old was captured in late April and was charged with so-called mercenary activities by separatists in the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic. In a social media post, Mr. Yuri's mother said she was absolutely devastated. The remaining 5 candidates will go head-to-head tonight in the first of 3 live televised debates. Suella Braverman has given her support to Liz Truss as the next Tory leader after being knocked out of the leadership race yesterday. The Attorney-General says the Foreign Secretary is the candidate to unleash the opportunities of Brexit. Former Chancellor Rishi Sunak won the most votes, with Trade Minister Penny Mordaunt coming in second. Conservative MP Richard Holden told GB News he's backing Rishi Sunak.
I think Rishi is by far the best person positioned to win seats like mine, take that fight to Labour at the next general election, because I can see that coalition, Labour and the Lib Dems, propped up by the SNP. I don't want to see our country broken apart. And Rishi's been on the ground in my constituency in recent weeks, and I genuinely believe he's the best person to take us forwards with a realistic plan, get inflation down, then focus on tax cuts. And I think that's a properly winning formula for realistic people in my constituency.
Well, Tom Tugendhat, chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee and candidate in the Tory leadership battle, says he's confident he will win the race.
The whole thing is all about focusing on what we're going to deliver for the United Kingdom, what we're going to deliver for the country, and about a clean start, because the way in which we're going to make this work is by changing the way government works, building trust and being a clean start. And as the only candidate who hasn't been in this government, I am the clean start.
The Met Office has issued a red extreme heat warning for parts of England on Monday and Tuesday. The highest alert means there's a danger to life amid soaring temperatures. That as the NHS are facing a surge in hospital admissions during the heatwave. Tuesday is expected to be the hottest day, with temperatures likely to top the UK record of 38.7 degrees. Meteorologist John Hammond says it'll impact everyone and action should be taken.
The impacts will be major. They're not going to last forever. It'll all be over by Wednesday. But for Monday and Tuesday, impacts to infrastructure, transport, health. And I would imagine that many schools will be closed as well, because this country can't cope with 35 degrees. But when we're talking about the potential for 40 degrees, then I think all actions that can be taken should be taken.
MPs and peers believe the government should apologise to women who were forced into making unwanted adoptions between the 1950s and 70s. The Joint Committee on Human Rights has acknowledged the wrongdoing to mothers and their children, saying they still live with the legacy of suffering. It's believed around 185,000 sons and daughters were taken away from unmarried mothers in England and Wales. And we can go now live to the High Court in London, where Archie Battersbee's family are reading out a statement. No apologies, we can't go live at the moment, but we will go live as soon as we get that. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's return to the briefing with Tom Harwood.
Hello and welcome to the briefing. We will, of course, bring that statement from Archie Battersbee's family as soon as we get it. Well, Tory leadership rivals are scrambling to catch former Chancellor Rishi Sunak after he won the second round of voting to choose Boris Johnson's successor. Well, joining me now to discuss what's going on in this race and the pros and cons of all of these candidates is the former Conservative MP, Neil Parish. Neil, thanks for joining us this afternoon. I understand you do not have a horse in this race. There is no one candidate that you have decided yet to back. Is that still the case?
I think I would go for Rishi if I was there in Parliament at the moment. But I think Penny Mordaunt is also very good. And what I'm really interested to see is that we, portray ourselves and the leadership contest in their positive virtues. The problem I've got with the race at the moment, there appears to be too many dark arts going on between the candidates and those that are running their campaigns, especially between Liz Truss and Penny Mordaunt. And it really is bad, because, we don't want to become like an American primary election, where they take chunks out of each other. I was in America when Obama had just beaten Hillary Clinton, and a Democrat said to me, if Barack Obama uses Hillary Clinton as his running mate, he'll need a food taster. So, the point I'm making is the party back here in the roots, the grassroots, want to see us coming together in Westminster. And of course, you've got to unite the party afterwards. So whoever wins the race, it's best not to have too much of a bloody battle before you get there.
This is potentially the most Americanised Conservative leadership contest in history. We're not having one, not two, but three television-style debates with all 5 remaining candidates, the first starting this evening, of course. What do you expect there to happen at this debate this evening? What do candidates need to say? What do they need to do to win over your former colleagues in the House of Commons?
Well, I think they'll have to, present themselves well to the camera, present themselves well that they can make their case in a debate. They will want to be sure that they've got policies that will actually help us tackle the cost of living crisis, move us on the environment. I'm very interested in sort of food production and getting enough food to poorer people. So there's a whole range of social issues, including free school meals and the like. So it's not just about tax, it's about driving the economy forward. Do their figures balance? Because there's no doubt that a number of candidates have got some sort of very interesting tax cuts, but I'm not quite sure exactly how they're going to pay for them. And so, the British public actually want to be told the truth now, and they want to, great country this is, but we've got to pull ourselves out of the mire. And these candidates really need to show this evening that, one, they've got integrity, but two, they've got the real policies that get us out of the problems, and also, 3, that they can bring the party together. Because I think that's what certainly not only viewers watching it, but that's what party members, the grassroots, will want to see, because they do not want the party to tear itself apart in Westminster. So we've got to come together. There's too much briefing going on, probably between the sort of henchmen and women of the various candidates. But I think, some of the comments that the Liz Truss team has made against Penny Mordaunt, I think Liz Truss needs to distance herself from, because otherwise, if you're not careful, you become tainted.
It's interesting, of course, because Rishi Sunak, the current frontrunner, isn't leading by a particularly huge degree, certainly compared to the other previous frontrunners in previous leadership races. He's well behind where Boris Johnson was at this stage, where Theresa May was at this stage, where even David Cameron was at this stage. I wonder if Rishi Sunak is too closely associated with the last 2.5 years. After all, for many Conservative MPs, one of the reasons why Boris Johnson was dislodged wasn't just because he had a bit of birthday cake in the cabinet room or mismanaged the communications of various scandals, but because there was something sluggish about the economy, because he wasn't seen to be governing in a particularly conservative way. Does not that reflect badly on the former Chancellor too?
Yeah, I think that's what Rishi's going to have to do tonight. He's going to actually have to persuade people that, he's got the right ideas to move forward. What, of course, he does have is huge experience. He's also a name to the public. You see, the problem is if you are electing a leader in opposition, you've got time to build them in and public recognition. The moment you go into government now, the moment he becomes leader, whoever becomes leader becomes prime minister, and, we've got so many problems to sort. So that will be key. I think he's got great experience. Like everybody in government, you don't get everything right. But I think at this moment in time, and also I think so far, I think he has shown that he is actually trying to bring people together rather than divide them, across the cabinet. And that's going to be really important. But you're absolutely right. Is the baggage too much? Do people want a fresh start? The problem if you have sort of too fresh a start, perhaps going straight into government with dare I say it, John Major used to describe his colleagues in those days as interesting sort of people. I won't say it on daytime television, but, they are difficult people to get back together and get on with government because, the public and the voters, and not only the party, are not going to forgive our parliamentarians if they don't concentrate on the real job. And I think tonight's debate will be really interesting to see who comes out of that. Sometimes these debates are more heat than light, but I think this one could be quite interesting. And I think people will be watching it. I think members of Parliament will be watching it because you see these days, you talked about an American style election. It is in front of the camera. It is the media. It is sort of social media as well that really matters when it comes to winning or losing a general election as well as governing. And don't forget, MPs want somebody elected that not only can hopefully govern the country well with integrity, run the cabinet, do all those things, but also in the end, have the charisma and have the personality to make Conservative MPs electable, because at the end of the day, more people vote Conservative and vote for the leader of the party than they do for you as individual candidates in your own seat. You usually get, some good local support if you've been a decent MP, but the label, the political label, is even more important.
Well, it will be absolutely fascinating to see those candidates, some of them for the first time on this national stage, present their charisma, their nerve, and potentially their talent as well in those in that debate. Thanks, Neil Parish. For now, let's bring in Jake Berry, who is backing Tom Tugendhat, someone that we haven't discussed particularly in detail on this show so far. Jake Berry, you are obviously intimately involved with Northern policy research. Tom Tugendhat, quite a southern guy, someone at the back of the pack right now. Why did he get your backing?
Well, I think Tom is a really interesting candidate. He's served our country. In fact, he was injured during the war in Afghanistan. He's once again ready to serve the British people. And I think what I think we need as a party is a clean start. I think someone who has served before, has shown such leadership qualities in our armed forces, is a really interesting person to be our next Prime Minister. And you know what? He's a really, really ordinary bloke. He has a young family like me. He gets this cost of living crisis because he lives it every single day. I think he has what it takes to unify and lead not just our party, but our country. And I think that, tonight in these debates, he will potentially, and I believe he will, turn this contest on its head. I think the more people see of Tom Tugendhat, the more they will agree that he is the right man to be Prime Minister of our United Kingdom.
Yes, potentially one of the reasons why this contest has seemed so unpredictable and indeed so close in many respects is that a lot of these candidates are just fundamentally quite nice people. Even though many of your colleagues might have policy disagreements with Tom Tugendhat, he's seen as being more of on the left of the party. No one in this contest has said that he's not a decent and nice and fundamentally good guy. I wonder if being nice, however, and being relatively relatable is enough, because he is trailing. He did go backwards in terms of the number of votes he got in the second round compared to the first round. Is it at all realistic to suggest that he's going to peel votes away from Rishi Sunak, from Penny Mordaunt, from Liz Truss, or from Kemi Badenoch?
Well, members of Parliament, people may not believe this necessarily, but we are just ordinary human beings. And when we see colleagues do exceptionally well on the debates, as I believe Tom will do tonight, then I think many members of Parliament will change their mind. It's a new contest really on Monday. Lots of these candidates the public don't know. Lots of their views haven't yet been aired. I think when people hear from Tom, it will turn the contest on its head. And in terms of being like, here's a nice bloke, but, I wouldn't mess with him. I didn't go on 3 tours of Afghanistan. I didn't sit there in the foxhole with the Taliban, coming over the top down to my last round of ammunition. There's a difference between being nice and being weak. He is as tough as guts, and that's why he's the right man, actually, to lead our country when we're facing, a war in Europe, challenges around cost of living. But he will give us a clean start, and he will deliver a new deal for Britain that wherever you live in this United Kingdom, he will, drive prosperity, wealth and growth. And that's why I think he's the right person for the job.
What do you say to those who say that Tom Tugendhat isn't really standing to be Prime Minister at all? He's standing in order to get a big job in the next cabinet. He's standing in order to become the next Foreign Secretary, say, and that's why he's sticking in this contest, even though it's relatively likely that on Wednesday he'll be the last place candidate and automatically kicked out.
Well, it's not for me to say what whoever is the Prime Minister will do about forming their own government, but if it's not Tom, and I believe it absolutely can be, I would say that he's done enough already to demonstrate that he should have a big job in government. This is not a negotiation. He is not playing a political game. That's not what Tom is about. He is about fighting, tooth and nail with blood and guts to get the privilege to lead our country. He has served before in the armed forces. He is ready to serve again as our Prime Minister, and he is the only candidate in this race who can give both this country and the Conservative Party a clean start, because he's the only one who hasn't in any way been involved with the previous administration.
He does emphasise his record in the military quite a lot, and it is impressive, there's no doubt around that. But when it comes to economic policy, we haven't heard that much from Tom Tugendhat. And it does sound like this is a race that is developing to be much more of an economic race, much more of a tax and spend, inflation, all of these issues. These are the big issues that people face in their lives right now. And all the polling and focus groups suggest that this is what voters want to hear about. What is Tom Tugendhat's pitch on the economy? Is he a small state, low tax kind of Tory? What would he change?
Well, I tell you a little fact. I went and filled my family car. It's a Volvo estate full of diesel today, and it was 120 quid to fill it up at the pumps. That is completely unsustainable. No family can afford, even people with high incomes like members of parliament, you cannot afford to be spending 120 quid filling up your family Volvo or your family car. And where he's been really clear that not 5p off fuel duty, he will immediately knock 10p off fuel duty and then put it under review, because we've got to break this grip of diesel and petrol prices on families' budgets. When I talk to my constituents, they are not particularly interested in the machinations of the Northern Ireland Protocol. What they want to do is they want to have a government that is on their side, a government that is rapidly going to get to grips with this cost of living crisis, which is crippling families up and down this country. It's not just the cost of fuel, it's the cost of childcare, it's all of those bills coming in. There's a little bit too much month and not enough salary to fill it. And he's been absolutely clear that that will be his top priority, both in terms of cutting taxes, but also creating growth to help families get through this cost of living crisis. And that's what we are there to do. We are there as members of parliament, and for him as the Prime Minister, to serve the public, not to get involved in some game of politics. It is not a game, it is about serving people. And that's why, with a clean start with Tom and that absolute focus on families and on budgets and making sure we can all afford to live, that's why I believe he's the right guy for the job.
What I found really interesting in this election so far is that those candidates with the most detailed policy, people like Sajid Javid, people like Nadeem Zwahi, those who brought forward dossiers on what they do on different policy areas, sort of listed in terms of all of those policies that they bring forward, those people got kicked out of this race fairly quickly. Whereas those candidates who have perhaps one or two policies that are pretty eye-catching, but not a big holistic vision, they're doing much better. Might that be a reason that we're not hearing that sort of large agenda, not just from Tom Tugendhat, to be fair, but also not from Rishi Sunak, not from Penny Mordaunt either?
No, I think every candidate's been absolutely clear that we need to cut taxes. Taxes are far too high in this country. I personally have opposed things like the national insurance increase. I've opposed things like the increase in corporation tax. It's a simple fact, tax is too high in this country, and we need to put that into reverse. It's not good enough to say that the Conservative Party is the party of low tax if you then become the government of high tax. And whoever wins has to grasp that nettle and deal with the tax burden falling on ordinary families. Look, in terms of Tom, I've been told since I started backing him that there's no way that he was going to beat anyone. So far he's already got ahead of the Chancellor of the Exchequer, two former health secretaries, the Attorney General, the transport secretary, all of those people with cabinet frontline experience. When you go into these leadership elections, it's not so much about policy, although you have to know that people are going to be sound on things like Brexit and sound on things like tax. It's actually about choosing the character of that individual and making an assessment about whether they have the quality to lead not just the Conservative Party, but to lead our nation. We are choosing the next Prime Minister, and I believe that Tom has all of those qualities, Tom Tugendhat. But of course, there are 5 other candidates. This is an embarrassment of riches for the Conservative Party. All of the candidates left in the race, I think, have some of those star qualities. I just think that Tom is best placed to lead our country through very dangerous and threatening times, given the huge experience he has had of the real world. We don't just want politicians who know about being politicians. We want people who've lived in the real world and understand the pressures families are under.
Jake Berry, thank you so much for that pitch there. It's really interesting to hear those details behind the Tom Tugendhat campaign. Thanks for joining us this afternoon on The Briefing. Well, this channel at 1 p.m. will be bringing you the first live hustings of the remaining 5 Tory leadership candidates. It's hosted by the Conservative Home website, and we'll be streaming it on this channel too. That's from 1 p.m. But for now, a short break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to The Briefing this afternoon on GB News. Well, one thing for sure, whoever wins the Tory leadership contest will be facing a huge challenge when it comes to the economy. As the cost of living crisis intensifies, the next Prime Minister will have some difficult choices to make in how to combat rising prices. Of course, inflation is affecting many countries in the world right now. Well, joining me to talk through those economic challenges is the Executive Director and Principal of Europe Economics, Andrew Lillico. Andrew, thank you for joining us this afternoon. I suppose the first big question is, does any candidate grasp the scale of the issue facing this country, the likely recession that this country may well be heading to in the next couple of quarters?
I don't think that any of the candidates have engaged with that question very much, or I would have hoped that the debate as a whole would engage more with the question of how we would deal with the cost of living. But some of them have said things. So, for example, Kemi Badenoch has rightly identified the cause of inflation as being keeping borrowing costs too low for too long. Penny Mordaunt has said that it's possible that the Bank of England's control over inflation might revert to the Chancellor of the Exchequer if they don't deal with it properly. Rishi Sunak has said that the tax cuts would be inflationary. I think he's wrong in that. And Liz Truss has said that the cost of living problems should be addressed by having tax cuts immediately. So they are engaging with the question. I think they should engage with it more, but then perhaps I would.
Why do you think Rishi Sunak is wrong in terms of saying that tax cuts would be inflationary at this moment in time?
As things stand, the inflation that we've had is going to lead to quite a considerable fiscal consolidation. So what's happening is that the deficit is going to be cut because in real terms, spending is going to fall because the inflation is racing ahead of it. And the rise in inflation is going to drag more and more salaries up the tax threshold. So you get a thing called fiscal drag, which means that the tax take tends to go up as a consequence of inflation as well. And those together will mean that we have quite a fierce fiscal consolidation going on, bearing down on the economy. Now, to some extent, there's a trade-off between that kind of measure, fiscal consolidation, and a rise in interest rates. So you might say, well, what we really want is to have less rise in interest rates, so we'll have more fiscal consolidation. So we don't want any tax cuts now. And that, I think, seems to be the Sunak point of view. But I think that's a mistake. I think that we want the interest rates higher. And because we want the interest rates to go up by more, we don't need as much fiscal consolidation as will happen without tax cuts. That doesn't mean I want very extensive tax cuts. The one thing I would probably be interested in is deferring Sunak's very harsh corporation tax rise. But I think that the basic idea that it's particularly inflationary at a time when you already have quite a fierce fiscal consolidation, just to relax that a fraction through some tax cuts now so as to facilitate higher interest rates, I think that that's flawed thinking. What we really want is to get the interest rates up.
Really interesting that Sunak seems to, in your view, favour lower interest rates, because, of course, he described himself as a Thatcherite to the Daily Telegraph earlier this week. Your analysis would suggest that's quite wide of the mark.
I mean, it's obviously a matter of degree. I'm sure that he thinks that interest rates should go up from where they are. It's just a question of he thinks that he wants to create more fiscal space for them to go up by less by having a fiercer consolidation. So it's a matter of degree, and he would probably say that he was quite Thatcherite and wanted to control the deficit. Obviously, that was a big Thatcher issue back in the day. I mean, I'm not sure that these historical analogies from 40 and 50 years ago are all that relevant to our situation now. I don't think everything needs to be defined in terms of how a Thatcherite or non-Thatcherite you are. To me, the real question is, what's the right balance of policy now? And I think that the right balance of policy now favours a bit more room for interest rate rises in the short term, and we don't need quite so much fiscal consolidation. One of the risks of having so much fiscal consolidation so quickly is that the way that you sort of solve the inflation question in the short term is by having a recession. And whereas if you had a little bit more interest rate rise, then you'll have a little bit more effect down the line. So I think that Sunak really wants to get the inflation question out of the way now so that come 2024, the economy is looking better because he's borne down on it a bit too much in the short term so he can relax it later. So I think his agenda is a little bit political in that sense. I think it would be better for the economy and society, even if it's not better for him politically.
I'm going to hold you there, Andrew Lillico, because we just need to go to the family of ARCHE BATTERSBEE, who are standing outside the court about to read a statement. Let's go to them now.
The ruling is a crush and blow to ARCHE and his family. With all due respect to Justice Hayden, it is not in ARCHE's best interest to die. Planned death is another name for euthanasia, which is illegal in this country. The planned removal of the ventilator is definitely the worst thing that may happen from my point of view. I cannot see how this in any way is dignified. We disagree with the idea of dignity in death. Enforcing it on us and hasting his death for that purpose is profoundly cruel. It is for God to decide what should happen to ARCHE, including if, when and how he should die. As long as ARCHE is fighting for his life, I cannot betray him. Until ARCHE gives up, I won't give up. I'm living every parent's nightmare. There must be a change in this NHS and the court system before another family has to go through what we have. We will be appealing the ruling to the Court of Appeal, and we ask for your prayers and support.
And can I just say, I think it's been put in front of the judge, which is quite misleading, that Archie will suffer a catastrophic cardiac arrest. If the tube is removed from Archie, within 3 minutes of, again, Archie's brain having no oxygen, he will too suffer a cardiac arrest. So either way, Archie will suffer a cardiac arrest. The difference with if he goes peacefully and God's way is the only way that will demonstrate is a flat line on the monitor. So I still stick by what I say. I'm still going to fight until the very end, and I'm going to appeal again. He is responsive. The nurse this morning, she was quite flattered that Archie's heart rate rose when she said, "Oh, Arch, I've got 4 days off of work now," and his heart rate went up to 101, and it sat all night at sort of in its 80s. So he's responsive. He's definitely responsive. It's also been put in front of the judge that Archie's unstable. This is a total lie. He hasn't had a bear hugger, which is what they're referring to as a heating aid. He hasn't had a bear hugger for months now, not just weeks, months. We've gone over a month. He still holds his own body temperature, even after having a bath. Before he was calling 0.3, I think it was, after a bath. Now he's still holding his own body temperature. Like I said, he needs time. Archie would definitely want me to keep fighting. When Archie's ready to give up, I'll accept that. I'm not clinging on to hope. But when my little boy decides enough's enough or he can't fight no more, and it's God's way, then okay, fair enough. I'll give up.
Will you keep fighting?
What, after Archie? Now, I will keep fighting, yes.
And that means the next stage of that is hopefully an appeal?
Hopefully appeal.
So this is not the end of the road, young girl.
We knew what the outcome would be today, which is why we're not shocked.
The judge says...
No, I don't. I think it was made very clear what Archie would want, and it's not just a case of Archie would want to be here for his mum. Tom and Archie went into great detail, didn't they, Ella, over... Now, this wasn't a conversation that I led. I was in the kitchen making food. The conversation was between both of my boys. Both have got very different opinions on being kept alive on life support. But to be honest, I think that as a parent, the fact that we are supposed to have this conversation with our children at such a young age is quite disturbing, really. They're kids, let them be kids. You know, have we all now got to sit down while they're eating their Cocoa Pops and say, "Oh, can you just sign this if you're on life support," and then go into graphic detail with our children? Like, if you're on life support and it means this is what will happen to you, would you still want to be kept alive? You know, but quite clearly, when it comes before a court, and obviously the trust, that's going to be the sort of the final decision. So I think it's alarming. It really is.
The judge said that the treatment was intrusive and intensive.
Right. No, I totally disagree. COVID patients are kept on ventilators for a lot longer than Archie. Okay, he does suffer, or he is more at risk of catching infections because of the plastic tubing, as any of us would be with a foreign body inside us. Some of us with jewellery, you know, like we get infections. He's on very minimal medication. His sodium levels for the last 3 weeks have been very stable. Probably the most stable that Archie's has been. The blood pressure, apart from when he's turned on his right side, again, quite clearly a response. When he's turned on his right side, his blood pressure, it drops. As soon as they move him, it goes back up. Even the nurses, one of the nurses come in yesterday, and because obviously his blood pressure dropped yesterday morning, and she went, "Oh, you've put Archie on his right side again." The nurses know themselves that he doesn't like being put on his right side.
Do you accept that he won't make it?
Who knows? I'm not God. I don't know. I've had lots and lots of people send personal experiences, personal videos, where they were told exactly the same as what we're being told, and they've made full recovery. So you can only live in hope, but like I said right from day one, where there's life, there's hope.
What
What is it that you're fighting for a chance? It's more time.
To give him time. And then if Archie decides to give up, then...
Well, the family of Archie Battersbee there. Just to recap, a High Court judge has ruled that doctors can lawfully stop providing life support treatment to a 12-year-old boy who suffered a catastrophic brain injury 3 months ago after reviewing evidence. Doctors treating Archie Battersbee say continued treatment is not in his best interests and should end. Archie's parents, Holly Dance and Paul Battersbee from Southend in Essex, disagree. They say his heart is still beating. Mr Justice Hayden, who reviewed evidence at a hearing in the Family Division of the High Court earlier this week, on Friday concluded that ending treatment was in Archie's best interests. Well, we can go now live to the High Court in London, where our reporter Alice Porter has more details of the case. Alice.
Hi there. Yes, we've just heard from Holly Dance, the mother of Archie Battersbee, giving her reaction to the news that Mr Justice Hayden has said that the life support machine that Archie Battersbee is dependent on to breathe should be switched off. The parents completely disagree with this decision, and they say they will be appealing it. Now, Mr Justice Hayden, the reason he's sort of come to this conclusion is he says that the ventilator that Archie is dependent on and the treatment that he is receiving is intensive, burdensome and intense. And we did hear in court how Archie has become very, and I quote, malnourished. He's also become anemic. He's having lots of problems with his digestive system and having issues to do with diarrhea and constipation. So I think there are a number of factors there that's meant that the judge presiding over this said he wasn't able to have dignity in his life. And the family very much disagree with this decision. They say they want this to be God's will, and that was the focus of it. This is a Christian family. They believe that Archie should die in a manner of which they want to true to their faith. They don't want a human being making a decision and switching a ventilator off, and so they say that this is not in his best interest, but that is against what the judge said. That what the judge said, which I thought was really striking, was that this kind of ongoing situation only serves to protract his death while being unable to prolong his life. And I think that's sort of the key really in the judgment that's been made today, is this ongoing treatment is not prolonging Archie's life, but in fact the judge says that it's only protracting his death, and therefore saying that this is not in Archie's best interest for the ventilator to be kept on. But as I say, the parents will be appealing the decision. So what that could mean, it could go to the Court of Appeal again, or even further afield.
Well, Alice Porter, thank you so much for bringing us the details there of what is a really, really sad and difficult case. Thank you for clearly explaining that. Well, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has said that the UK could have a better economic future outside the EU than inside it, as if the government slashes post-Brexit red tape and diverges from Brussels regulations. Right, that's not Boris Johnson saying that, but Sir Keir Starmer. Well, Starmer, formerly a staunch Remainer and advocate of a second referendum, said it can only be done by greater flexibility by both London and Brussels. Well, joining me to explore this change of heart from the Labour leader is the former editor of the Labour List website, Peter Edwards. Peter, thanks for joining us. Has Sir Keir Starmer had a Damascene conversion?
No, I think it's consistent with what he's said since becoming leader of the opposition, which is Labour accepts the result, and it builds on that speech of a week or so ago where he said we're not going back into the customs union or the single market, and rule out a return to free movement. So if the Brexit question is settled in terms of Keir Starmer's leadership and the Labour Party, then it's right to think about how we can get the best out of it economically. So going to see another left-leaning leader in one of the biggest economies in the world seems completely reasonable and sensible.
It's interesting to listen to the words of Sir Keir Starmer about whether or not the United Kingdom should diverge from European rules, because a lot of people would argue that the way in which you deliver the benefits from Brexit is that you set your own distinct regulatory regime, one that is more competitive in the UK. However, a lot of other people argue that we need to closely align ourselves with European rules to make trade easier. I wonder to what extent Sir Keir Starmer now falls on the former rather than the latter side of that divide.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're still working out the answer to that question. But in Keir Starmer's speech last week, he gave a number of quite technical points. They're not things you'd necessarily see on the front page of a tabloid newspaper, but it's thing about recognising qualifications or food standards, which can have a particular impact when you're talking about getting food into Northern Ireland. And in the midst of all that technical detail, exactly, it goes to the point you made. The technical detail will help define our future relationship with the countries that are still in the EU. So, and obviously, Boris Johnson, although in a sense his history, he derived a political benefit from having a lot of rows with EU leaders, even after he won the referendum. So if Keir Starmer can get in a space of accepting the result, working on the technical detail to get the best economic outcome for all of the United Kingdom and improving relations with leaders, that's quite sensible. In a sense, we're all a bit exhausted by Brexit. If the Labour Party is moving from an argument about legacy things like the single market to actually how we can make the technical detail work, then I think that's sensible and probably something that will go down quite well with voters who are pretty tired of it all as well.
Keir Starmer is in Berlin today, meeting the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. He's a member of the SPD, I should say, in Germany, the sister party of the Labour Party here in the UK. I wonder to what extent this is a beneficial visit for Sir Keir Starmer. Olaf Scholz has come under a huge amount of international scrutiny due to his unwillingness to put sanctions on Ukraine, his unwillingness to send arms, sanctions on Russia, I should say, unwillingness to send arms to Ukraine, and indeed his Green Coalition government shutting down nuclear power stations. Is this a man that Sir Keir Starmer should be appearing relatively close to?
Well, I think on those individual positions, the German Chancellor is going to be revisiting some of those. But there's a broader point. It goes back to Tony Blair, that if you're a centre-left leader of the opposition and there's another centre-left leader in power of a major economy around the world, then being seen with them really helps. And obviously the classic example of that in my lifetime is when you had the Blair leadership in opposition going over to America to see Bill Clinton, his team, because the Clinton team were in power in America before Blair was in London. So there is an element of reflected glory and, to be frank, a photo shoot with a leader. But you're right that questions are asked of Germany, and we all understand the historic reasons why Germany was reluctant to provide arms. You can understand that sense of caution. The last data I saw, Britain had done very well on meeting its pledges on providing arms. Germany had made the pledges, but it's not met all of its commitments. And of course, the whole world is on the side of Ukraine as they suffer this tragedy. So if Keir Starmer is holding the German government's feet to the fire on that, that's very welcome, because we need to get all the help we can to Ukraine as quickly as possible.
Well, really interesting there to explore Labour on a bit more of an international footing than it has been over recent years. Peter Edwards, thanks very much for joining us here on The Briefing this afternoon. Well, returning back now to the other side of the House of Commons, the Tory leadership contest. Yesterday, after Suella Braverman was eliminated from the Tory leadership contest, I caught up with the former Health Secretary Matt Hancock. Now, he's backing Rishi Sunak to become the next Prime Minister.
Matt Hancock, your candidate Rishi Sunak is underperforming compared to the front-runners of contests past. Why is that?
Well, he's just won the second round, so he's got over 100 MPs backing him. It's a very wide race. I think that's a good thing. To get almost a third of MPs backing you when there are 6 candidates is very good, and a big increase this time. And he's winning the argument as well, especially about having his economic plan, credible economic plan. And when it comes to the polling that really matters is who can beat Keir Starmer and make sure that we don't have Starmer and Sturgeon splitting our country up. The answer to that question is Rishi Sunak.
Now, you took a little bit of time to decide who to back and eventually plumped for Rishi Sunak. At that stage, he was the odds-on favourite to win. Now he's second in the minds of the bookies, potentially because he's not polling that well with Tory party members. Do you regret the decision?
No. In fact, I feel incredibly comfortable with the decision because I took a decision based on who I think will be the best next Prime Minister. There's a long way to go when it comes to the debate amongst members. I think it's highly likely Rishi will be one of the two candidates who goes forward from here, not least because he's already got almost a third of Tory MPs backing him. These are the people who know the candidates best. And he's got the plan, and also he's been through so much scrutiny, both of himself and of his plan, you know, that scrutiny will come onto all of the candidates, and I know that Rishi will shine through that.
Now, Suella Braverman has dropped out of the race. She takes a number of supporters with her, of course. What's Rishi Sunak's pitch to win those supporters over?
Well, do you want to have the person who has the credible economic plan, who can win and save this country from Starmer and Sturgeon? If you want those two things, then you should back Rishi Sunak. You know, he's got what it takes. He's got the character, he's got the plan, and he's the one that the country thinks is better than Keir Starmer, and that's good enough for me.
Now, Rishi Sunak's been running the economy for the best part of the last 2.5 years. His plan has been what has been running this country. To some extent, do Tory MPs not want to see a change in economic policy? They want to see more growth-focused and lower tax in terms of how the economy's run?
Well, you can't be more growth-focused than Rishi Sunak. I mean, the guy is a massive supporter of all the parts of the country, parts of the economy, the sectors of the economy that are growing fast and are going to shape our future. But you've got to have a credible plan. You can't just say things that might sound good or you think might sound good. You've got to have a plan that can actually deliver and is grounded and responsible, and that's what Rishi Sunak has got. And if you think about it, this country has had the most intense economic headwinds. You know, getting through the pandemic, where the furlough scheme and all the support for small business was absolutely vital, and then the inflation shock that's come from a combination of China still trying to pursue this impossible zero COVID strategy, and of course the war, which has led to the sharp rise in energy prices. Those are the two big impacts, negative impacts in terms of them pushing up inflation. We've got to grip inflation first and not do things that might make it worse. And that's what Rishi's plan is all about. Get growth going, get inflation down, and cut taxes when we can.
Aren't there taxes you could cut that would in themselves bring inflation down? VAT being an obvious example.
What you can't do is pump up the economy further and pump up inflation more by loosening fiscal policy at a time of high inflation. We've got to remember the lessons from the past. Nobody in policy-making circles, whether officialdom or in politics, was there when inflation was 10% or higher last time, 30, 40 years ago. You cannot forget the lessons from the past. It was Margaret Thatcher who said sound money must come first. In fact, she said sound money is the basis of sound government. You've got to get inflation under control first, and of course cut taxes when you can. And if you listen to some of the people who worked with Margaret Thatcher, they're exasperated at her being prayed in aid for the idea that you can have unfunded tax cuts that can't be afforded. And if you think actually about Rishi, he grew up in a pharmacy, in a chemist shop, understanding that family budget, understanding the way you've got to make ends meet. That's what we've got to do today, and that will get us out of these economic challenges whilst focusing on the exciting industries of the future that Rishi is a big champion of.
His classmates at Winchester College might disagree that it was the most ordinary background in the world, but I want to just speak on this idea of inflation, because it's £37 billion of spending, not all of it funded, raising $5 billion with a windfall tax and then spending $37 billion. Does that sound fiscally responsible?
Well, if you look at the books at the Treasury, they add up. and they get debt coming down. And that's what we need to do as a country. We need to get debt coming down, inflation coming down, and taxes coming down. We shouldn't be trying to choose between those and just go for one of the three. We've got to have a responsible, credible economic policy. And when it comes to Rishi's background, born in a pharmacy, to a mum who's a pharmacist, a dad who's a GP, he got a scholarship to a great school. He got into a great university on merit. He was then a successful businessman. These are things that we in the Conservative Party value, we care about. That is great, and it's great that our country can produce an exceptional individual like Rishi Sunak by giving them a great start that he through his hard work has been able to build on. And if you think about it, look back 50 years, two people come to this country to make a better life for themselves and their family, and their son has been Chancellor of the Exchequer. I think it is a great positive story, and I want to see more stories like that, and I admire people like that, and that's one of the reasons I admire Rishi.
Now, just finally in this conversation, we've got two candidates left in this race of five who would describe themselves as being on the free market right. You've got one candidate in Tom Tugendhat who might be more of a One Nation caucus person. You've got a candidate in Penny Mordaunt who might fit into the sort of Cameroonian liberal conservative wing. Where does Rishi Sunak fit?
He's a conservative, and he unites a broad church of the Conservative Party, and I think that's another one of his many advantages.
Matt Hancock, thank you.
Former Health Secretary Matt Hancock there defending his candidate Rishi Sunak, who currently leads the pack. But on to another story now. Britain's security service MI5 needs more funds to tackle the rising threat posed by right-wing extremists, an intelligence report has said. Well, now, this comes as concerns have been raised that extreme right-wing groups are pursuing British military personnel as potential recruits. Well, Britain's Parliamentary Intelligence Committee has revealed that in 1 month, a fifth of MI5's terrorism investigations involved far-right extremists. But the agency has not been given extra funds to deal with that rise in work. Well, joining me now is former Prevent officer and research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society, Charlotte Littlewood. Charlotte, thank you for making the time for us this afternoon. I suppose people might raise an eyebrow to this idea of far-right terrorism, given that all of the incidents in the last year or two, and there's been a member of Parliament who has been murdered, there's been a car that exploded near a hospital, there have been a number of incidents. Have any of them been directly linked to the far right?
I think while we understand that Islamist extremism and the threat from that is very real, by saying that there is a rising threat in far-right related activity is not to deny that there is an ongoing threat from Islamist-related activity. So we have seen just under 30% of all foiled extremist-related terrorist offences in the UK coming from right-wing inspired groups. So just under 30% of that which was foiled. So you have to look at what we are stopping as well as what is materialising. The whole point of funding towards our security services and counterterrorism policing is to ensure these attacks don't happen. So we really do need to look at what is being stopped really than what is materialising. And we need to understand that this is funding to MI5 to be able to do counterterrorism work, to include counterterrorism work against Islamist-inspired attacks.
How safe are we right now? Are we less safe than we were 5 or 10 years ago from terrorism?
I think we are under a greater attack from those that are inspired by extremist thinking. However, I do think that we have programs in place, Prevent and Channel, which are working. We've seen just last year 46% of cases within Prevent and Channel being right-wing inspired, which is really concerning, but it does show you that we are handling the issue. So I don't want to say that we are at a greater threat from being attacked as we walk down the street, but I would say our intelligence services and Prevent are working very hard to prevent that from happening, and that the fundamental risk is really there.
Well, Charlotte Littlewood, thank you so much for that overview there. Research Fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. Really appreciate your time. That's it for the show today. You've been watching The Briefing. I'll be back at 9:30 on Monday. In a few moments here, though, we'll bring you the first live hustings of the remaining 5 Tory leadership candidates. Now, that's hosted by the Conservative Home website. Well, that's from one, but for now, here's the weather.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. A fine, sunny but increasingly hot weekend will lead into some extreme heat through the early part of next week. The Met Office have issued warnings, extreme heat warnings, for Sunday into Tuesday. High pressure is building in. That's creating the rising temperatures. But at the moment, at least, there's weather fronts sitting across parts of the north, bringing quite a lot of clouds and some outbreaks of rain across northwest England. A few showers coming into Scotland, the far northwest turning drier and brighter. A cloudier day for the Midlands and southern parts of England, but still quite a lot of sunshine along the south coast. And it's pretty warm out there. Temperatures, though, just getting into the mid to maybe high 20s. Fairly cool, though, with the cloudier weather further north and some showers around. However, temperatures are going to be ticking up both by day and by night as we go through the weekend. This evening, a few showers lingering over parts of northeast England before steadily fading away. For many, it'll turn into a dry night and a clear night. Actually, a reasonably comfortable night as well, with temperatures certainly rural parts of the north dipping down to single figures, but staying in the teens further south. However, the heat will start to build through the weekend. A fine summer's day for the vast majority tomorrow. Some rain likely across northern parts of Scotland, spreading across the Northern Isles. A few showers over the Highlands and the Western Isles, but sunny spells through the Central Belt, Northern Ireland, and for most of England and Wales. And temperatures